Thank you, Pernilla. Thank you, Albert, Brian, for organizing this really cool interdisciplinary conference. I feel like I'm a little intruder. Like I'm not from philosophy. I was trained as a developmental psychologist. I have always been a big fan of philosophy, so I try to push my research topic to be closer to philosophy. So some of the things I will be talking about is brand new and I have not really talked about elsewhere. So bear with me for some of it. If you have questions, I would really appreciate them. So, and I should mention that a lot of the work was in collaboration with Dora Campish in Copenhagen and Mai and Nagoya. Those are my collaborators, and also along with the students in my lab. So, I will start by telling you about this superpower that we all have, which is reading minds. We can guess, infer thoughts and feelings of other people just based on their behavior, based on what they do. And we can even predict how someone else will behave. We can even manipulate what they do using our words and expressions. This seems practically like a superpower, but the question is, where does this kind of superpowers come from? And this, I'm sure nobody here needs me to tell you this is a question that's been captivating human thoughts for like at least hundreds of thousands of years. Where do mental capacities like this mind-reading superpower come from? Like I mentioned, I will be approaching this from the perspective of a developmental psychologist, and some of the students right now. So, again, bear with me. So this is stolen from Plato, right? So this question is ancient, and there's some clues as to how people approach this question. So in general, people think about where our mental capacities come from roughly two perspectives. One is by teaching or practice or something along the lines of nurturing experiences. And then the opposite is that it comes to man by nature. In modern terms, genes, evolution. So it's, despite this very long history of thinking about this question, where does our mental capacity come from, it's actually very recent since the study of mental capacities and its origins become a science. So what allows us to study mental capacities as a scientific discipline? I'm going to say that there are some clues in this little cartoon description that I put out here. A lot of our ability to infer other people's mental states are actually based on their behavior. And this was indeed also what psychologists picked up, right? The study of behavior, systematic measurements of subtle differences of human behavior in response to manipulations in experimental conditions. That's how we turned the study of human mental capacities into a scientific discipline. And of course, nowadays we also have other research methods, all the exciting neuroscience, booming new methods. So today we're going to focus on behavior. We can actually learn a lot about how other people are thinking based on their behavior. And here is one type of behavior that psychologists have used to study the mind of humans and also non-human species. So pretend that you're someone, even if you don't like strawberries, blueberries, pretend you like blueberries. You see these options of two bowls of blueberries. Which bowl would you prefer? Do you prefer the bowl with a heart or the bowl with a flower? Which one would you choose? Flower. You want more food. And so it turns out that if you give basically this task, of different versions of this task, to human adults, they would make the same choice, they'll pick the bowl with water in mouth, but also human child, even infants, non-human species like apes, even insects, and also a whole variety of other species I'm not talking about. So the evidence like this have been taken by psychologists as evidence suggesting that a capacity to differentiate quantities like this vary approximately seems to be something that's potentially both ontogenetically and phylogenetically very early emerging, that's available to human infants, to all these non-human species. So and also the behavioral methods goes far beyond just asking explicitly what you want to choose, because some of these species are not able to necessarily make that choice. So even using looking time, disability was present in infants as young as newborns. Okay, so here is another way to plot the data from this kind of behavioral tasks. So these data come from lots and lots of actual scientific research with human adults, children, infants, and ants. And you can see this kind of wiggly gray line is roughly how they perform on this task. So everybody's way above chance. There's some variability, and it's up for interpretation. Maybe the baby and the ant didn't really necessarily understand what the task is about. Maybe they're more noisy in their data. Maybe they have worse accuracy. It's up to interpretation. But overall, researchers have taken this data to suggest that this capacity to talk language apart is present very early in humans. Okay, so now our question is, what do people think these agents will do? So one possibility is that lay people, they hold similar beliefs as reflected in scientific data. Alternatively, people might overestimate or underestimate these different agents because of their personal experiences. Like, for example, like the baby just seems so helpless that maybe they have no idea how to talk language apart. So we first asked a whole lot of lay adults online. We basically showed them the same kind of stimuli that you saw, and then we asked them which pole will this agent choose. And this is the data. You can see that. To me, it's surprising. I didn't expect the adults' data to be basically lining up almost perfectly with the empirical data, with the exception of the age. And I'm happy to talk more about what that might mean. And then the first question we were asking following this was, so you can see that they're thinking about these different agents differently. Their predictions are different. So one possibility is that they were not really answering our question. Maybe they're just distracted by the picture of the cute baby on the stimuli, and then they're choosing less because they're distracted. So we ran this same study with a different group of people. Instead of asking them which bowl will these people choose, we just asked them which bowl has more. So ignore basically what's going on. And you can see their performance was not making any differentiation of these different agents. So again, this is suggestive that what we found in our previous experiments it was likely reflecting some beliefs that people hold about these different agents. So far, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, you might have explained this and I might have missed it. I was just curious what the baseline.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to explain that. So the baseline was just there's nothing on the screen. We're just asking them which has more. So just to establish this is a trivially easier task for adults. And the reason we have this kind of design is because we also want to do the same kind of study with children to see where this sort of belief about other agents' mental capacity, how that develops over time. So we basically did the same study with a group of children, 5 to 8-year-olds. And again, you can imagine that children might have very similar beliefs as grown-ups if these kind of beliefs that we hold about these agents might be early emerging, or these beliefs that the adults hold might come from their years of experience with all these different agents from textbooks and media, movies, whatever, in which case we might see a very significant difference between the children's beliefs and the adults' beliefs. So here I'm going to show you the data from 6 to 8-year-olds, so these are not super tiny children, these are school-age children, and you can see just first impression, just glancing over the orange club and the purple ball, you can see that they look different. And I would like to say that they look very similar for the baseline, so this task is also truly easy for the kids. They also look very similar for predicting the adult and the child. In fact, there's like barely any difference. And then when you look at the age, so adults were overestimated for the age, and the children were kind of underestimating for the age, so children don't think that ages are very good at telling quantities. And then the most dramatic difference comes from for the human infants at the end. These children basically think, like, no, these guys have no idea which one to pick. They're like hopeless. So again, I'm more than happy to talk more about this. I also have some data from younger kids if you're interested. So for this first chunk of data, I think in general we found that we as adults, we make pretty good predictions about different kinds of minds, at least in this little quantity choosing paradigm. And these predictions definitely change over development for reasons to be explored. The next part, I'm going to switch the paradigm a little bit. So far I only talked about this one ability of telling quantities apart. And this was under this kind of evidence have been basically building up to a theory called core knowledge theory in cognitive development. So the basic idea is that there is a set of core cognitive / perceptual capacities that supports these basic computations and learning mechanisms across domains, including number, but also like how we represent objects, spatial locations, other people. And these are modular, encapsulated, domain-specific input analyzers and learning mechanisms, very much along the lines of Jared Fodor's proposals of how the minds might be organized. And currently popular learning proposal kind of based off of this is to suggest that these core representations might be serving as the starting points or the priors for later learning and belief activity. So all of this to say, now we asked some questions about one domain, and we used one particular behavioral paradigm to ask it. Now, we have all this evidence for all these different domains showing that from very early infancy, before the first 6 months of life, babies are able to tell colors apart, perceive depth, prefer faces, expect objects to behave in certain ways, different quantities, even social preferences, like they prefer people that are helping other people instead of hurting other people. So all of these, we have empirical evidence that these capacities emerge way before the first half year of life. So a lot of these, actually there's brand new evidence earlier this year showing that even newborns show some evidence that they prefer individuals that help others versus hurting others. So psychologists or cognitive scientists use this evidence to theorize that there is early emerging potentially innate core knowledge. Now, we're wondering now, everybody is such, we're theorizing about other people's minds all the time. So if we treat lay individuals as kind of psychologists, what do they think of all of these capacities? If we describe the kind of tasks that babies have to do to people, which they probably usually don't think about. Like, one possibility that people don't think that babies can do math is because they don't think about, like, oh, it's not doing math, it's just seeing dots and seeing which one has more. So will we find that people actually think that these capacities might be early emerging if we describe these kind of behavioral tasks to people, is the question here. And so that's what we did. We tell people little vignettes, stories like this, like there was a person called Alex, who wanted to see cookie. So again, we had, when we designed the stimuli, we had in mind that we'll also use the same materials with children, so all of these were described in a child-friendly way. She can tell which cookie has more chocolate chips without counting. She can tell which has more. Now, the first question was, when could Alex tell which has more? So we give people different ways to measure this. One way is to show them this kind of pictures, this from Lisa, my advisor's daughter's pictures, that they can pick. And then we also ask them, a different group of people just to type how old. We also have people to like put like with a sliding scale. So like all these different measures basically give you the same results. And then for this version, I just choose which age. And then we follow it up asking, so how come you can tell which is more? And for this version, people just type their responses freely, and then we later categorize it to be more in line with like innate genes, maturation kind of based interpretation versus the orangish ones are like learning, observation, teaching. But then again, we did this experiment like 20 times. We also gave people sliding scales, like is it 100% genes or 100% experience, and so on and so forth. And all of those results kind of look the same. Okay, what does it look like? So on the x-axis here is when could someone do something for the first time, and then on the y-axis here are the different abilities we ask people about, and then here's a reminder for the color coding. I'm going to first show you what research found. So for all of these abilities, so we also included seeing, hearing, and reading as our kind of anchor questions. Everything except for reading should be available before the first half year of life, and reading should emerge around school age. And then here's our data for seeing and hearing, perfectly lining up with empirical data. Everybody almost says that you were born with disabilities. For reading, almost everybody said that to learn it somehow. And then for all these things in between, they are definitely in between the sensory abilities and reading, and then you can see that compared to empirical data, people were definitely overestimating for every single one of these core abilities, and people prefer to ascribe these abilities to learning experiences rather than genes and maturation, especially for, and you can imagine like for these more quote-unquote cognitive or social abilities, people seem to have an even stronger preference for learning and experience. So these results were replicated with like different types of measures, like I said, different ways of describing the ability instead of like who can tell which has more, we said things like who will choose the one with more, etc. We also replicated with people in India, people in Japan. We replicated this with 5 to 8-year-old children who, similar to what I showed you in the first experiment, with this task, the children also showed an even stronger preference for learning and experience. We even replicated with scientists in the US. So you can probably predict what I'm about to say. So I think these results suggest that people seem to share an intuitive empiricist kind of belief about these basic perceptual and cognitive abilities, regardless of their cultural background, age, and even education. And if you're wondering where this, so like me, one of the questions following up is like, where do these beliefs come from? And the late great Lilac Wang once quipped that empiricism is innate. So I mean, it is ultimately an empirical question, especially for developmental psychologists to ask: is empiricism innate? And it's a very much interesting question I'm interested in pursuing. But the funny joke aside, I think our evidence so far is at least consistent with the interpretation that we seem to start, at least young children seem to appear to be more empiricists than adults, and education seems to actually attenuate the effects. Like psychologists are definitely much less quote-unquote empiricists compared to other scientists or maybe people. Okay, so we're doing on time. We're getting a little bit close. So I'm going to show you one more set of study, and again, kind of expanding from what we have so far. So far, we seem to be, or I think I was unintentionally using this nature-nurture framework to pose the questions, to interpret the data, to do everything. All these categories we came up with was very much based on a nature versus nurture, native-based versus empiricism kind of dichotomy. So the question is this fair? Like, are people, because we're trying to, it seems like I'm imposing this nature-nurture thing on lay people's beliefs. So the next question is, and also we only focused on a handful of abilities that, again, people like me care deeply about, but maybe that's only a small subset of all kinds of abilities that we actually have, our mental capacities. So the next set of questions is asking. Now, if we give people all these different kinds of mental capacities, and then we ask them about development, we kind of probe them to think about change and development, and what kind of structure is going to emerge from it. So instead of a kind of a top-down approach, we're going to do a bottom-up approach. We're going to collect a lot of data from people and ask what kind of structure is going to emerge from their data. So the basic paradigm is very similar. We also ask people like boy versus girl and all these different ways that didn't seem to make a difference. And again, these are the different ways. Like we might include a picture, might not. I'm just asking to type. But the question is just, there's this ability, this mental capacity. When do you think someone could do that for the first time? And then we got data from all these abilities. I'm not going to read through them. I know it's probably hard to see exactly what they are, but just take my word for it. A 2D structure emerged when we asked people about human development, and roughly the categories seem to kind of fall into reflective, social, so we think about having intentions, telling right from wrong, experiencing pride, doing computations, versus like embodied, affective, so like feeling safe, feeling nauseated, feeling hungry, and people obviously think that these reflective social abilities emerge much later in development. And then we replicated these results in 6 different countries. So Japan, Australia, Mexico, UK, US, and South Africa. And basically the same pattern emerged. And so it's pretty consistent across all these different methods and participants in different countries. And then the next question we asked was, is this actually specific to human development? So instead of asking about age of a person, we also, so for one version of the study, we only asked about a human adult. And then in a different version, we also included a robot. And then the question also changed from at which time, which doesn't, like how old, which doesn't make sense for a robot, to how capable do you think this entity is. So this is the replication of the 2D structure with the development considered. And then, you can see that when it considered a non-human agent, it became a 3D structure. And it's not like half of these abilities factor A, half of the abilities factor B. It's kind of like mixed bag. And then when we asked about a single human with no development, it's also a 2D structure, but again, it's not lined up at all with the structure that showed up in development. And then we asked, okay, so now we find a beautiful 2D structure. Is this nature versus nurture? So we asked people explicitly. Now we're capable of this ability. Do you think it's 100% nature versus 100% nurture? And then we just asked whether it lines up with the factors that we found earlier. And as you can see here, the 2D structure we found from all this bottom-up exposure factor analysis closely resembles nature-nurture interpretation. So these data shows us that there is potentially unnatural nature-nurture framework underlying how lay people reason about the mind and its development. And again, I'm sure that you'll have a lot of follow-up questions and criticisms about all of these, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks, that's super interesting. You showed us data relevant to this, but I feel like I didn't have a chance to like scrutinize it. So maybe you can describe what's going on. So part of what I was interested in is what the relationship is between the two factors that you find that characterize the development trajectory, and then other differences in the ways that we conceptualize agents. And so in other research that's looked at differences in how we think about, for example, humans versus AI systems or robots. Some of the dimensions that seem to be relevant are what they call like agency versus experience, which is kind of maps like moral agency versus moral pagency. And then there's other work that finds kind of like mind versus soul versus body. Yeah. And I think I would have thought that you'd get some correspondence to the body and experience dimensions with what you're finding on the nature side. But at least eyeballing it, it doesn't look like there is a very clean correspondence between whatever's going on with the robot. So I was curious, how do you think all of these different sets of distinctions relate to each other?
Yeah, that's a really sharp and really great question. Thank you. Yes, so we were at one of the papers on the review, and we've gotten a lot of criticisms along those lines. And one of the key questions people ask is that how is this different from all these previous frameworks? So I think the short answer is that. Well, like you said, it doesn't perfectly line up. But we also tried to just to ask people explicitly about. So one of the popular frameworks is experience agency. So we like explicitly ask people in the same way that we ask about nature versus nurture, and it doesn't really correspond. Tana's absolutely right that some of these have to line up with the experience agency framework, but then some of them don't. I'm trying to remember an example. Or the mind, heart, body distinction. I think is one that I remember more clearly because that makes a little more sense to me than experience agency. So the mind and heart divide kind of separates here because so when you think about things like experiencing joy or feeling love, it's heart, but then at the same time that's something that probably exists. Like we don't think of it as something you have to learn. Whereas you can have something like experiencing pride, which would also be heart, but that's something that's kind of culturally dependent. So there are these distinctions that are hard to qualitatively describe, or to, I guess, strongly theorize exactly what separates these. But I think one of the key differences was, and again, our data gave us some clue that maybe thinking about these different, like this previous research, they don't just ask about humans, they also ask about robots and roaches and all kinds of other entities. So maybe thinking about humans specifically kind of attenuates the difference between humans and non-humans. So one of the biggest differences between humans and non-humans potentially is whether we think they have soul or heart. And if that's one of the key distinctions, then we would expect this heart dimension to kind of disperse when we focus on human development. Actually, thank you so much. That kind of clears up a little bit. I've been wondering this question. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. So my question is about, I'm wondering about your personal take why people do believe that people learn abilities and don't think it is by they are born with it. And also I'm wondering, is there data regarding different cultural, also like intercultural data? Like do people in India believe as well
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me answer the easy question first. So the reason why we went to find we didn't just find people from India. We specifically asked which religion they ascribe to, and we only picked people that believe in Hinduism, which supposedly they believe in like reincarnation and souls and like all these things. And so we thought that well maybe there's some cultural differences there. Maybe these people will think that some of these abilities have to be innate. But to our surprise, if anything, they appeared even more empiricist than our U.S. sample. And of course, one possibility is you might think like, well, you know, the adult data were collected online. Who knows who's really sitting there filling out these questions? But I think just from like experiences talking to lay people about these things, and talking to like we did a lot of these with children and talk to their parents. It's very difficult for people to think about the well, hold on, sorry, I think I have a better example. So historically, once upon a time, researchers thought that newborn babies could not see. And even some of my relatives still believe that newborn babies cannot see, which seems ridiculous now that we have all this evidence that newborn babies absolutely can see. Like if even before they were born, they can already see it to some extent. So I think just historically, I would take that potentially as non-scientific evidence that maybe this sort of empiricist bias is probably just runs deeper or for longer. And one of the reasons that might be the case is that it's potentially actually useful to think that babies are useless or like babies know very little, right? Because we want to put in all the effort to care for them. We want parents to talk to the babies, teach the babies, to like show babies all kinds of things. So maybe this bias to think that babies know less than they do is actually quote unquote adaptive. That's not a scientific claim whatsoever, but that's one of my experience.
Just a thing around this question. When you look at religion as a background, wouldn't it be interesting, or maybe you've done that, to look at certain religions where the idea of being predetermined by whatever background, that you have a really predetermined life, a predetermined character and all of that, that this kind of background belief changes the evolution?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess we try to get that a little bit by going to the Indian culture. Like, presumably they still have like a caste system kind of related belief. But again, our evidence is very limited. So we haven't gone in depth to like interview people and all that. So, but that would be really interesting to find out.
Yeah, mine is just a curiosity. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Have you asked about like what people think about higher order mental state, like imagination, when is it developed, or
That's
something
a
like that?
really good question. Let me see. So I don't think imagination per se is this. We took this. So this list of items was based on some previous research asking about different entities. There are higher level things like
Yeah, so like
working towards a goal, telling right from wrong, feeling depressed, being conscious. I don't know if that's high level or low level. People actually think that it's kind of low level.
Yeah, but I was just reading about imagination.
I know. We should have. We should have been including more items.
Can you go back to the correlation about the nature-nurture responses?
This one.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering whether this is measuring like a true belief that they have about it, or how socialized they were to think about nature versus nurture. Because I feel like, I mean, this is obviously from my experience, I don't know how bland this is, but the nature-nurture concept kind of like gets socialized in school a lot. It's taught very dichotomously, like that they don't overlap, and then obviously once you go into research, you realize there's a lot of overlap. So I'm just wondering, what do you think this correlation is kind of proxying on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I'm not super familiar with the American education, or I guess Japanese education system. Most of these data from Japan. I kind of don't think that, like, so speaking from someone that went through education as a psychologist, obviously we talk about nature nurture all the time. I don't know if everyday folk, like, or in middle school people talk about nature nurture. So I would think that that's probably, I mean, but then at the same time, you can argue that, well, you know, Plato wrote about it, and it's in probably all kinds of stories and books and whatnot. But then that kind of goes to the other side of this historic view that maybe this is something that's so deeply ingrained in human thoughts that it's just there the whole time. So I guess one way to test it is to ask, like, what 5-year-olds think, and do they show the same kind of structure? And of course, that would take a lot more time and effort to actually figure out.
I never thought about this before, although I feel like I didn't, see you present on earlier versions of this work, which is always interesting. I was thinking how to what extent this is a reflection of like a bias to be an emphasis, innately, like Lila said, versus how much it is based on people's evidence that they've collected over time when they're like living their individual lives. Because when we see babies, they're like helpless. So if we look at their behavior, we can't really infer really complicated, mental capacities based on behavior, and their behaviors are only evidence to really proxy what they might be doing. So in some senses, maybe it's that like the lack of evidence for the complexity is maybe just recreating this bias in individuals rather than this bias being innate. I was wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So one little piece of evidence we kind of have is that some of the participants are parents themselves, and some of them are not.
Yeah.
So it compares whether there's difference between people that report that they're parents of children versus not. We didn't find a difference. At the same time, you can interpret that in different ways, of course. So another, right, so like presumably there's information about babies being incompetent everywhere in media. You don't have to be a parent to be aware of that. But if I have to go back to our data to say like, well, so far the evidence we have seems to suggest that this bias is, if anything, stronger with children with less experience. But you can also think that, well, possibly they're close. Well, having both a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old at home, you can see the 5-year-old thinks especially little of the 2-year-old. So that might be also contributing. So again, I agree that's a really, really good question, and we just have to get more data to figure it out. We do have actually one new paradigm that we developed in collaboration with Dora, that we made this 3D animation. We show it to babies, like 1-year-old babies, and so far our stimulates adults picking between different quantities, and it seems to show that these babies expect this adult to pick the larger quantity without any previous evidence. You can imagine a version of that, them watching another baby doing the task, and that will kind of start to get some of the questions too.
Any other follow-up?
Yeah, you get one more, of course.
Very shortly. Now, your idea that this may be from the experience of adults, that they always experience across cultures babies as very helpless in a sense. They cannot survive independent from parents. They have to be taken care of. That's a specific framework. What about comparing the evaluation of mental abilities of young children with that of non-human animals? Of course, also historically, our picture about non-human animals changed a lot. Now, if we learn about mental abilities of animals and see videos where they do something, are we inclined to say that it is an inborn ability, and is it something they learn? My bet would be that we are inclined to say it's an inborn ability because we have no relation to these kind of development of mental abilities, while in the case of kids we say, we also have been babies, and there must be an empirical development, so there must be the learning process.
Yeah. Thank you so much for mentioning this. I forgot to put this in the slides because of interest. I actually have data, so similar to, but I think the argument you were making actually sounded better than the arguments we were making originally. So for this version of the study, we also, the way we did it was a little weird, but kind of along the lines of what you were saying. So we tell people, say, like fish, when they see two groups of fish, and all of these descriptions are based on actual studies. So when fish saw two groups of fish, they would get closer to the group with more fish. And then when do you think this fish could do it? So we kind of tell them that the fish can do it already. And then the rest of the questions are basically similar. And then what we found was that just imagine that all of these circles just move this way. So all the circles become majority blue instead of orange. So exactly like Albert said, this seems to be specific to thinking about human mind. Like for animals, of course, they can be built in. Like they don't need to learn. But for humans, we're special. How to learn these things.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you went over this, but how did you? So I see when you ask your questions, you have pictures of a human being. How did you choose what picture to put for that? Like, did you put any pictures?
Oh, well, we did different versions. For this particular version, this is the baby of my grassroots advisor. And it's like when the baby was these ages. So I know we also did versions with like different kids' pictures, no pictures, with no labels at all. They just put in the numbers and what to offer, and they all kind of come out the same. And just add one more thing to Albert's point. We also asked about emotions and personality traits with the same kind of measures, and it also looks mostly like blue and unique. So it's like about conceptual cognitive human abilities specifically. Great, thanks.